Is there a way to control it or eradicate it?
Eradication is not a term widely used for hydrilla or any other aquatic invasive plant for that matter. So prevention is our best asset right now, and if we can also be thinking about biological control agents for when infestations do show up, and we need to address them.
There are some for hydrilla?
There aren't currently.
There aren't.
No, we certainly need one.
We know for milfoil, they've used a type of fish that they thought would eat it. They, of course, use the machines to cut it. They pull it by hand from the bottom of the waterways. In some cases, they've used chemicals outside of the Adirondack Park. Are they all together having an effect? Has that worked against milfoil, and is the hope that it could at least tackle hydrilla?
Certainly for reducing infestations to maintenance levels. Again, for widespread infestation, eradication is very rare. If you find it when it's small and isolated, yes, you can deploy those things and you could have success. But for hydrilla, pretty much every time it's been found in the Adirondacks, in New York, it's had to be responded to with a pesticide treatment to the water body, which is not ideal. So it just shows how aggressive it is.
And that would require special permission in the Adirondack Park.
Absolutely, yeah. I think we wouldn't have any other choice if it were to be found in the Adirondacks. It's something we would have to do to protect the water bodies we have here. But it's usually something we try to deploy as a last resort, and it is a last resort for hydrilla.
A couple of the other invasive plants that we're so familiar with now as we drive along highways, especially along interstates, the purple loosestrife, we're very accustomed to. But a plant that grows often with that, Phragmites, very tall grass, reed grass, a number of people know it as well, is really spreading. And you've been working on a study, and in fact you authored, did you author the study?
I did, yep.
And what was the study about, and is there, how widespread has that problem become of Phragmites turning up just about everywhere?
So it's a widespread problem across the Northeast and into the Midwest, Great Lakes region. Essentially that research that we published is a synopsis of our efforts to control it in the interior Adirondacks over the past 7 years. So we've been controlling pretty much every infestation west of the Northway to the other blue line. And we've had some amazing success in controlling it. It's really a result of identifying infestations when they're still small and responding as quickly as possible. We are in a unique situation here in the Adirondacks where our Phragmites infestations are still in that early detection rapid response category, where you can actually find them and eradicate them from the landscape before they expand and have widespread impacts.
How big is too big? I mean, what would be considered a small infestation that you would be able to handle?
So under 1/10 of an acre is something that we could probably eradicate within that 7-year time frame. Anything over an acre, acre and a half, it's going to be a very long commitment, probably beyond 7 years at this point, and you may never eradicate it. So that's sobering news to other places. In other places of New York, the infestations that I drove past on the Northway this morning, and the Great Lakes where there's hundreds of acres, thousands of acres of Phragmites, you're not going to be eradicating it. It's going to be sustained control efforts to try and reduce its extent, and we have to be thinking towards the future of biological control agents to really have a solution for long-term reductions.
And are there biological controls for Phragmites?
The research is underway right now. So one of my co-authors, Dr. Baron Blassi at Cornell University, is researching one of those biological control agents right now with some promise.
What's the danger of it? Obviously, it can spread and take up large areas. It competes with other plants. Often it's in wet areas or swamps, so it's probably competing with cattails and other native plants. But what's the problem with Phragmites? What's the concern?
So it's a wetland invader, probably one of the best wetland invaders in the world. And in the Adirondacks, we have a lot of wetland systems. We have about 600,000 acres of wetlands that are very scenic. They provide a lot of wildlife habitat. So we want to protect those. On the human side of it, they can also create traffic safety issues. So this plant grows to 15 feet tall. An example of it is right off the Northway here on the exit. If you have that plant growing at a major intersection or blocking important signage while you're driving, that's a safety issue. So it's also increasing the cost of roadway maintenance for DOT and highway departments. And then lastly, for economic impacts in general, think about, shoreline properties. The value of that property is tied to being able to see the view of the lake. If you have Phragmites blocking your view, 15 feet tall, which happens all the time, especially if you look out into a wetland that's been invaded by it, then your property value is no longer as high as it should be. And people are spending tons of money trying to control it to reopen that view and restore the property values. But as our research indicates, if you're not finding it when it's that small isolated infestation, it's going to be every year trying to throw money at this problem.
Can you cut it down? Can you just cut it down at the end of the season and keep it at bay, or does it grow back every year?
We usually don't recommend cutting because it's a plant that spreads through autofragmentation. So essentially what that means is each fragment of the stem or the root can form a new plant. So if you just cut it down, essentially you're just breaking it apart, and each one of those little pieces can start a new plant.
So homeowners shouldn't go back in their backyard and mow it down. They may be doing more harm than good.
Yeah, it would probably be spreading the infestation. If they did it in the winter or late fall, it'd probably be okay because the plant material is dead at that point. But during the growing season, it's not a good idea. We have hope in the Adirondacks to keep this species at bay and potentially eradicate it from a very large area. It also gives sobering news to those programs that are trying to deal with very large infestations, trying to encourage them to evaluate whether you're having success. But the long-term goal is to have a biological control agent that we could deploy on those larger sites.
And the work goes on that.
Yep.
All right, Brendan Quirion, thank you very much for taking the time to be with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.